The millionaire's scorned daughter married the waiter from her restaurant against her father's will. Something happened at the end of the ceremony that left everyone speechless. Evelyn Calloway peered through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, taking in the world outside her father's estate. From this vantage point, things seemed rather calm. Cars driving along Charleston streets, people strolling freely and intentionally. But inside the lavish residence, Evelyn felt not the slightest bit free. Though she was encircled by immense wealth, her father had laboriously constructed a gilded cage around her over the years. Her father. She had grown up in the lap of luxury thanks to her father, Richard Calloway, who controlled a huge chain of restaurants. She was able to lead a life that most people could only dream of, replete with the finest clothing and education. Above all, though, Evelyn longed for freedom and love that were unadulterated by wealth or social mores, things that money could not buy. Her shoulders were burdened by her father's expectations, which she would never be able to totally shed. Richard held a position of dominance in Evelyn's life. He wasn't fundamentally cruel, even though his standards were high and his plans for her future were set in stone. His aim was for her to wed a wealthy and influential business partner who would be able to continue the family name. The problem was that Evelyn didn't want to take her social standing or finances lightly. She wanted to carve out a path for herself, away from other people. Her father intended to keep her behind bars. While Evelyn was attending one of her numerous obligations, a charity event at one of her father's fancy restaurants, her life took an unexpected turn. Seated at a table with important people, she was forced to smile and nod through dry talks about acquisitions and market shares. Her eyes darted across the room to look at someone she didn't know because she was that bored. Wearing black slacks and a simple white shirt with his sleeves rolled up, he was bare-chested. He was positioned close to the bar. His casual walk and slightly twisted dark hair belied the rich crowd around him. He had no place in this world. That's exactly what caught Evelyn's attention when she thought about it instantly. Because this man seemed so average and out of place among the richness and glitter, Evelyn most wished for normalcy. Evelyn quickly discovered that he was Logan, one of the restaurant's servers. Their paths crossed not by coincidence, but rather because of her clever planning a lost wallet, a friendly conversation at the bar, etc. She made it simple for herself to initiate contact with him. Logan treated her differently than the others did. Her wealth or last name did not scare him. To him, she was more than just Richard Calloway's child, she was a person. What started out as small talk turned into much more. Logan was different from everyone Evelyn had ever known. He was modest, reasonable, and polite. The games of power and wealth that surrounded her on a daily basis did not interest him. Logan treated Evelyn like an equal, which was delightful and liberating for her. She was not the affluent heiress to him. She was only Evelyn. Of course, they had to keep their connection a secret. Richard would never approve of his daughter, who is ostensibly the heir to his multi-million-dollar estate, getting close to a waiter. Thus, Logan and Evelyn met in secret. Late at night, strolls along the coast. Dinners in private places aside from her usual haunts. It was during these moments that Evelyn felt totally free. Her affections for Logan were heightened by his disregard for her social status and her father's wealth. She could laugh and converse with him, and for once in her life, she felt normal. Evelyn knew the risks, though. Her dad kept a close eye on everything, particularly the restaurants he owned. It wouldn't be long before someone noticed how intimate she was growing with Logan and told Richard. She wanted Logan's embrace, but she was afraid her father would find out. She wanted to be independent of Richard. She was willing to fight for her happiness, even if it meant going up against the man who had run every aspect of her life. One evening, Logan's old vehicle was parked on a cliffside overlooking the ocean, and they were sitting on the hood. Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder. The smell of salt from the sea drifted through the chilly breeze, and the stars above them twinkled in the clear night sky. Evelyn loved the kind of times like these. "I hope there's no need for us to hide," she mumbled, her voice barely heard above the roar of the breaking waves below. Logan wrapped his arm around her and drew her in. "Yes, but your father," Evelyn said with a sorrowful groan, "that he would never embrace us." Logan was silent for a long time before responding. After that, we'll need to find a solution. You refuse to depart from me. Evelyn, we'll make time for each other. I promise. Even so, his words gave her hope in her heart. Evelyn knew that their time in hiding was almost over. Richard was a shrewd man who never allowed anyone or anything to get in the way of his well-considered plans for his daughter, not even love. But Evelyn could not bear to be apart from the one person who truly made life meaningful for her. Evelyn's covert relationship with Logan was growing more thrilling and risky with each interaction, whether it was a late-night phone call or a stolen moment in the park. She had never experienced anything like this before. For the first time in her life, she was not abiding by her father's strict regulations. She was caring for herself and engaging in an activity that made her feel alive. She was quite concerned that Richard would find out, even though she cherished their time together. Despite everything, Logan remained composed. He didn't grow up in a culture where meeting expectations and performing well was oppressed. Evelyn appreciated his capacity for a modest lifestyle and a love of the small things in life. Being near him gave her the relief that she had been waiting for. But Logan was unprepared for the serious consequences that would follow if Richard discovered their relationship. Following their sly exit from a charity ball one night, Evelyn found herself in a remote area of the city park with Logan. The night was clear, save for a thin layer of clouds that blocked out the stars. With his hands in his pockets and his face tilted up toward the sky, Logan stood beneath a large oak tree. When Evelyn saw him standing there so composed, her heart warmed up. "I have to head out shortly," Evelyn said. As she approached, she cast a sidelong glance as if she thought someone could be pursuing her. Logan smiled softly and reached out to take her hand. "Everything is well. To put it plainly, I'm glad you came." For a little while, they walked in silence, the sound of their footsteps lightly crunching on the gravel path. Something about the silence of the night made their private meetings feel personal, like they were the only two people in the world. Even in those quiet moments, though, the weight of the reality they had to live with continued. "Have you ever thought about what might happen if your father found out?" Logan questioned in a solemn, quiet tone. Evelyn paused. That was a question she had asked herself many times, but the answer had always unnerved her. "I'm not certain. He's not simply too cautious," she conceded. "He will be cunning if he finds out about us. I'm concerned about his possible actions." Logan took Evelyn's hand and comforted her, saying, "I won't let anything happen to you. Regardless of how long it takes, we'll figure everything out." But even with Logan's best attempts to calm her, Evelyn's dread went beyond anything her father could do. She thought Logan was going to vanish. She had seen firsthand what happened to her father when someone crossed him. Richard did not take well to his own daughter defying him. The stakes rose even higher a few days later when an employee of the restaurant noticed Evelyn spending more time with Logan. Richard Calloway's business associates learned of the heiress and waiter's relationship as the stories gained popularity. Though none of them dared to question Richard directly about it, it was only a matter of time until someone close enough to him decided to bring it up. Evelyn could feel the tension mounting. As much as she loved Logan, the reality of their situation began to grip her, and she could no longer hide forever. She didn't want to lose him, but she also didn't want to live in constant fear and secrecy. The more she thought about it, the more stuck she felt. But no matter how hard she tried, she was unable to think of a practical response. But Logan wasn't going to let their situation overshadow their blessings. He was going to find a way to have them together no matter what. He informed her one evening during their dinner meeting at a small, secret diner, "You're worth fighting for. It doesn't matter what your father thinks of you. No matter how difficult it gets, I don't care. I will remain with us." Evelyn was deeply in love with him, but her fear of what might happen next was heightened by his statements, which wounded her heart. As they ate lunch together, their anxiety faded momentarily and was replaced by the sheer delight of being together. Sitting in the dark corner booth for hours on end, they talked about their dreams and the life they wanted to live, one unrestricted by expectations or wealth. Though the moment was warm, they both knew their time in the shadows would not last. Evelyn's father would eventually learn that there was no turning back. One evening, while they sat together on Logan's couch in his little apartment, Evelyn's phone kept vibrating. She glanced at the computer and saw that her dad had missed several calls. She felt her stomach flip with anxiety. Richard would never have called her this many times, unless there was a problem. "I have to go," Evelyn said. She spoke with a slight tremble. Logan was staring at her, clearly displaying concern. "Do you think he knows?" In answer to his question, Evelyn bit her lip and felt its weight sink into her chest. That night, knowing their time of secrecy was coming to an end sooner than she had anticipated, she muttered, "I don't know, but I'm afraid to find out." Even though they promised to fight for their love, Evelyn knew that a storm was building and would eventually make its way to them. Evelyn sat at the edge of her bed, watching the early sun peek through the curtains, her heart beating. She was aware that she needed to confront her father. After a difficult night, the tension was simply too great. Richard had left her a ton of missed calls, and each one seemed like a ticking time bomb. With each passing second, she knew that she would get closer to facing him and the inevitable fallout from her friendship with Logan. She took a big breath, stood up, and smoothed down her clothing, her hands trembling slightly. This confrontation had been coming for weeks now, inevitable. In her father's world, nothing was ever overlooked, especially not when it came to her. Evelyn knew she had to confront the music. The wide staircase of the mansion echoed the knot in her stomach, the polished marble beneath her feet shining cold. She could immediately hear Richard's voice from his office. It was low and serious, possibly discussing business with one of his many associates. But before he knew it, Evelyn had materialized at the doorway. Richard looked up, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers. With a tone as bland as ever, he said, "Evelyn, sit down. We need to talk." Her heart thumped in her chest as she collapsed into the leather recliner across from his desk. She felt the tension in the air, like a dagger piercing it, and the weight of his investigation. "I've heard some extremely fascinating things lately." Richard started to move. Even with his measured tone, there was a roughness in his voice that made Evelyn's skin prickle with anxiety. "And I want to hear from you whether there's any truth to these." Evelyn swallowed sharply, feeling her throat dryen. Hearing her father's comments made the situation feel much more real, even though she knew exactly what was about to happen. "You've been seeing a staff member, I've been told," Richard continued. His fingers flicker under his chin. "Logan. I believe that's his name." Evelyn froze there. There was nowhere left to run from the unvarnished truth. Her father had, for a split second, located the exact thing she feared. She considered lying about not thinking that anything had happened. However, Logan wasn't that, and she deserved better than that. "Yes, Dad, I have been seeing Logan." Evelyn claimed that her voice was barely audible above a whisper. The room was dead silent for a few moments. Richard did not change his look, but there seemed to be a shift in the atmosphere. He slowly stood up and shifted around the desk until he was standing in front of her. He towered above her, his shadow sweeping the room. Evelyn prepared herself for this blow since she knew it was coming. "Are you doing this correctly?" There was seething anger there, but Richard remained silent. "Do you know what could happen as a result of this? To us? All I have worked so hard to attain is being thrown away by you." Evelyn's hands were clasped in her lap, her claws digging into her palms. "I'm not throwing anything out. Dad, you have my affection. It's not your kind of person to hang out with, Logan. He values me for me, not your name or money." Richard gave a bitter little chuckle. "Devotion. You think that love is involved here? This is about someone using you as a tool because they believe you hold the key to a happier existence." Evelyn's heart sank at her father's words. She knew he would be angry, but she had not anticipated this level of cruelty. "Logan isn't like that," she continued, her voice faltering slightly. "Money doesn't concern him. He doesn't show enough care." Richard interrupted her, raising his voice. He moved a step closer, his face inches from hers. "I'll stop this crazy fling with you. I didn't raise you to be an idiot, Evelyn. You will marry a man worthy of our family. a man who understands what it means to be a Calloway. Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes, but she would not let them fall. She was not a child anymore. She was not going to live her life at her father's mercy. For an extended period, she had lived under his dominion, taking his lead and yielding to his every desire. However, not at this time. This time, she had to stand up for herself to make sure she was happy. "I'm not stopping now, Dad." Evelyn felt a knot in her stomach as she spoke. "I won't leave Logan because you don't believe it's proper. He is my love." Richard's eyes narrowed, revealing the long, simmering anger. "If you don't change, you will be sorry you took this course. Evelyn, I don't think you can sacrifice your life for a waiter." His comments infuriated Evelyn, but she refused to give up. "This is my life, not yours. You can't control me forever." Richard's face hardened, and for a moment Evelyn thought he was going to strike her, but he withdrew instead. His expression was impenetrable and icy. He said it coldly. "But if you carry out this, you will no longer be a part of this family. No more assistance or inheritance. It will take everything away from you." Evelyn's heart tightened at the finality of his words, but she wasn't going to give up no matter how painful it was, and she wasn't going to show weakness. "These days, I would rather have nothing and be with the one I love than live by your rules." After a long, awkward moment, Richard took his eyes off her. "You're making a mistake," he said. This was a mistake. His words were hardly audible. "You'll always be affected by it." Evelyn stood up and walked out of the room, her legs shaking under her. She knew there was no turning back now. Thoughts were racing when Evelyn left her father's office, the heavy door closing behind her. The home didn't feel warm as usual. Instead of being a consolation, its opulence served as a reminder of the recent separation. Her father's threat was always present in the background. Either continue dating Logan and risk losing everything, or end things and return to her comfortable existence. But how could she go back to that life now? How could she let go of him when she felt freed from somebody? Over the next 4 days, the level of stress in the Calloway home only increased. Richard stayed away from Evelyn, preferring to communicate with her through the house staff, and when they did exchange words, it was clear that their gap was growing from one another by his icy glares. As the affair became known to Charleston's social elite, gossip began to circulate around the Calloway heiress and her relationship to a lowly server. Before long, outside pressure also started to increase. At one of the many events held to raise money, Evelyn was expected to see her father's business partners, and she was met with suspicious glances and nasty little smiles from their spouses. Sharper than before, the murmurs followed her everywhere. Heard rumors that a waiter is dating Richard's daughter? It is reported that Richard is furious. "She's going to wreck everything." Evelyn raised her head high, pretending not to hear the comments. She was always the perfect daughter. She was the perfect hostess, never once going out of her place. But now she was the target of gossip, and it was clear that her father's social circle was turning against her. Even though Evelyn was crushed by their criticism, she refused to let it break her. She was going to stick with her decision to go with Logan. But Richard was not going to let this continue without putting up a fight. He executed his next move with frigid precision, using his power and influence to exert pressure on Logan from the sidelines. It started with little things, like extra shifts at the restaurant, sudden changes to the schedule, and rumors about Logan's supposed untrustworthiness. Coworkers began conversing among themselves, discussing Logan and why he was still employed in light of all the rumors around him and Evelyn. During the afternoon, Logan received a call from his manager. The voice on the other end was Carrer's, informing him that he would be transferred to a less upscale location outside of Charleston's bustling center, where the clientele would be wealthy and the tips would be generous. There was a clear demotion, but no justification was given. Even though Logan knew better, he was aware that Richard Calloway was attempting to use his position of power to drive Logan out of Evelyn's life. Logan's news of Evelyn's downsizing broke her heart. Even though she knew her father wouldn't stand by and watch helplessly, it was harder than she had imagined to witness the real consequences of his influence. "This is just the beginning." Logan tried to keep his voice calm as he talked. He will stop at nothing to keep us from staying together. Evelyn's palms quivered with anger. He can't have it all, she fiercely said. It is not for him to pick who I love. Logan, though, was less optimistic. He'd grown up in a world totally different from Evelyn's, so he knew how strong males like Richard operated. They were difficult to beat. He took her hand and gently said, "Evelyn, I hope nothing bad happens to you. He's your father, thus he has resources. I can't meet Evelyn's steely look with mine. I don't care about his resources. I don't care about the money. I value you greatly." Logan smiled at her, but his eyes were still filled with worry. "But we need to go cautiously," he said. "I'm not going to let him get in the way of us. He is determined to succeed, and he will not give up." Days passed and Richard's stress level rose. Evelyn began to be shown off to wealthy suitors, each of them more successful and well-groomed than the last. Every week, a new man would come before her, complete with ostentatious outfits and phony assurances of a life of luxury and power. Richard never said it directly, but the message was clear. None of these men would be a better match for her than Logan. Evelyn kept a quiet eye on everything, smiling politely but never looking up. Her father's attempts to force her into a marriage of convenience only strengthened her resolve to stay with Logan. These men were shallow and just cared about her family's wealth and prestige, so she didn't want any of them. They all didn't care about her as a person. But Logan did. One evening, following a rather unpleasant dinner with yet another candidate chosen by her father, Evelyn was about to lose it. She hurried inside Richard's study, where he was sitting behind a huge oak desk. After thoroughly reviewing some business paperwork, she exclaimed and closed the door behind her. Richard hardly ever took his eyes off his materials. "You're trying to control my life here," he said coolly. "I assume this is about our guest tonight." Evelyn became enraged. "I told you I wasn't interested in any of these guys. I won't change that. I'm with Logan because it doesn't go with your ideas." Richard's eyes, when they eventually met, were detached and calculating. "Logan is not a member of this family. He was not and will not be. The faster you accept it, the sooner we can move on." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. "It's not about the family, Dad. It has to do with you managing everything. I'm not a child anymore. Given the freedom to select, I've settled on Logan." Richard slowly stood up and shifted around the desk to stand in front of her. "Your future is being forfeited for someone who is undeserving of you. To be a pawn in your business dealings is worse than having nothing and being with my lover." Evelyn responded. The tension between them crackled like a live wire. Evelyn knew that this was only the beginning of her fight for freedom, even if neither of them was ready to give up. The battle lines were set. Logan sensed that the growing strain between Evelyn and her father was crushing down on them both, that it had reached a breaking point. Logan and Evelyn were in love, but Richard seemed to be in every aspect of their lives, creating obstacles at every turn. Logan was beginning to realize just how strong Richard really was. This was more than just a battle of wills. It was a struggle for dominance, and Richard would stop at nothing to win. Logan had never imagined himself in this situation. He had always lived a straightforward life and had never experienced a convoluted life brought on by wealth or influence. His earnings as a server provided him with enough money to lead a stress-free and comfortable life. But after getting to know Evelyn, everything was different. Now he found himself in the heart of a war far bigger than anything he had ever experienced. One evening, Logan was sitting in his small apartment when the pressure became too severe for him to bear. The dim light from the side table lamp cast long shadows that made the space seem even smaller. Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder and used her fingers to create tiny patterns in the fabric of his shirt. They enjoyed quiet times together, but it was always tinged with the thought that her father would not approve. "It has been on my mind." "Silently," said Logan, putting an end to the silence. Evelyn looked up at him and saw his serious tone. "With reference to what?" Logan hesitated, knowing that even though he didn't want to harm her, he had to voice his opinions about us and all that was happening with your dad. "It is getting harder and harder." "Evelyn." Her brow pinched in concern, and she sat up straight. "It's challenging, but we can do this." All we have to do is continue to be one. Logan shook his head in frustration and combed through his hair. It's not just about holding each other together. Your father is keeping me from doing stuff, Evelyn. He's pulling strings at the restaurant, chatting with other customers behind my back, and making it harder for me to even keep my job. I was transferred to a different area as a result of his conduct. He won't stop till he pushes me out completely. Evelyn was devastated by it. She knew her father was meddling, but hearing about Logan's ordeal made it seem even more serious. Logan, I'm so sorry. I was unaware of how far he was progressing. Logan took hold of her hand and squeezed it tightly. It's not your fault, but I'm worried about what he'll do next. He's not only aiming for me, he is pursuing us. In addition, I don't want to make you choose between your family and me. Evelyn answered, I've already made my choice. You were my choice? She said with a resolute gaze. My life can no longer be ruled by my father. You state that now, but what occurs if the situation worsens much further? He's going to pursue us further, and I'm not sure I can bear to put you through that again. With a gentle smile, Logan acknowledged her strength. I don't want to be the reason you fail miserably. Evelyn was extremely wounded to realize that Logan was right. Not only did she know she couldn't leave Logan, but she also recognized her father wasn't going to give up easily. Logan, being with you doesn't make me lose anything. You're not the reason I would lose anything. The freedom and joy I'm experiencing in my life are worth far more than what my father was unable to provide me. Logan sighed, conflicted. Despite his intense affection for Evelyn, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was pressuring her into a fight she wasn't deserving of. Justin, I don't want to watch you suffer. Evelyn leaned in, her forehead resting on his. I would rather suffer through everything with you than face life alone. Together, we'll sort things out for a while. As they sat with their arms around each other, the world got lighter. But Logan couldn't shake the constant feeling that maybe the best thing he could do for Evelyn was to let her go. In the days ahead, Logan found it difficult to decide. Despite his intense love for Evelyn, he couldn't help but wonder if parting ways with her would be the one thing that would shield her from her father's wrath. Logan feared Richard would not let up as long as they were together. It would damage Evelyn. One evening, Logan sat by himself in his apartment, staring at his phone. He considered calling Evelyn to talk to her, but the words would not come. Even though he knew how much it would hurt, he could not bear to contemplate doing her any harm. But wasn't it better to hurt her now than to make her suffer for the rest of her life because of her father's interference? He heard a knock on the door while daydreaming about the future. Evelyn was waiting there with troubled eyes, sensing something wasn't quite right when he opened it. The thought of losing Logan without understanding why he'd become so aloof lately was unbearable to her. Logan, what's going on? She whispered softly as she entered. You've been so silent lately, and it worries me. Logan turned his head to avoid looking her in the eye. Right now, I was thinking. He spoke with such enthusiasm about all that was about us. This fight against your dad may be too much for me. Evelyn leaned out to meet his chin, saying, We're stronger together. Are you not seeing that, Logan? I don't care what my father does. That is what I want beside you. I trust you. Logan's resolve faltered as he looked into her eyes. Overcome with love and determination, he was ready to make the hardest decision of his life, but standing there with Evelyn, he realized that giving up wasn't the correct move. They had something worth fighting for, but her father would never understand. I also think you're amazing. Logan embraced her and declared, I'm not going anywhere. Their love was stronger than Richard's, and even though their future together was uncertain, they were determined not to let him separate them. Though their choice had left them feeling heavy-hearted, Logan and Evelyn knew what had to be done. Charleston was ruled by Richard, and their relationship seemed oppressed by his constant condemnation. Evelyn had had enough of fighting against what was certain her father would not give up. There was no future for them in Charleston, not with Richard pulling strings and trying to break them off at every chance. There was only one option for them to control their own lives, by themselves. It was Evelyn who brought up the concept. She'd been thinking about all the scenarios for days, lying in bed at night with her mind racing over them. Though she was terrified of her father's wrath, She couldn't shake the feeling that this was the only way to real independence. One evening, as they sat together at Logan's house, she turned to face him, her voice steady but full of emotion. "We had to leave right now." Evelyn said nothing. "Charleston has to go away from us." Logan shot her a look of surprise. "What do you mean by this?" Evelyn took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to suggest was going to be serious. "We are not allowed to stay here." "Logan, not with my dad, always trying to take the lead on everything. We need to leave him behind and find another place. I've been thinking about accompanying you to Savannah. We might return to Zero. Just the two of us." Logan remained silent for a moment, as the gravity of her words set in. He'd thought about leaving Charleston before, but he'd never been sure Evelyn would be up for the adventure. Hearing her say it out loud gave him a wave of hope that they will finally be able to live the life they want, away from Richard Calloway's shadow. "Are you positive?" Logan inquired in a low, sincere voice. "I don't want to ask for your total surrender." "Nothing about me is going to give up," Evelyn replied. There was determination in her eyes. "I've chosen the two of us. I'm going to pick a life where we can live contentedly and where I won't have to worry about what will happen next. Money and status don't matter to me. I care about being with you." Logan's heart raced at her remarks, and he knew then that they were in this together. They would start over as a couple, free from her father's guidance and expectations. The next 3 days were devoted to a quiet flurry of preparation. Not even Evelyn's closest friends could keep their plans a secret from one another. Her father was always on the lookout and would become enraged at the slightest hint of their departure. They kept their distance, gathering only what they would need to make a quick escape. Only a few garments, a few personal items, and most significantly, her mother's necklace, the only really priceless item she had, were taken by Evelyn. The night before their departure, there was a lot of excitement in the air. Logan had taken a friend's automobile to avoid being followed. They didn't say anything for the first hour of their travel so as not to jeopardize their escape strategy. At last, Evelyn uncurled her shoulders, falling back in her seat and letting go of a breath she had no idea she was holding until they crossed into Georgia. "We really are trying to do this." She whispered something. I felt a mixture of shock and relief. Logan shot a brief glance at her and grinned gently. "Yes, we really are." As their automobile got closer, Savannah's old-world charm engulfed them. The cobblestone streets, the moss-covered oak trees, and the subdued grandeur of the old buildings gave them the impression that they had entered a new universe beyond Richard's reach. Even though the little, cozy inn they slept in that night didn't measure up to the lavish accommodations Evelyn was used to, it still seemed perfect. Just the two of them, without pretension, without comparison. The morning after, Logan got up early and went to arrange things. Even though he knew Evelyn wanted a low-key ceremony away from the extravagance of her former life, he was eager to make her wedding special. He came upon a small chapel overlooking the Savannah River on the outskirts of the city. It was perfect, silent, personal, and exactly what they needed. Upon his return to the hostelry, Evelyn perched on the edge of the bed, shocked that they'd actually succeeded. When they had left Charleston, her father's world had been abandoned. But fear began to creep in when Logan detailed the plans for the day they would be getting married in a matter of hours. Her heart beat at the enormity of it all, even if it was all she had ever wanted. "How are things going in your life?" Logan, who was seated next to her, asked. Evelyn nodded, though her hands were trembling a little. "We are saved from doing that today." Logan held her hands in his and smiled, saying, "It's just happening so fast. We can wait if you require additional time." However, Evelyn shook her head. "No, I would rather not have to wait. I've waited long enough to be free. Now, let's get started." "Come on, let's tie the knot." As opposed to the lavish affairs she had seen in Charleston, Evelyn could not have imagined a more ideal wedding. There were no costly dresses, extravagant floral arrangements, or cameras filming every moment. Instead, it was just the two of them, sharing a loving and hopeful commitment for the future while standing side by side in the little church. They walked out of the chapel holding hands, the river glowing golden in the late afternoon light. Evelyn had not felt so light in years. This was their beginning, a fresh start, unhindered by all that had stood in their way. But as they neared the steps leading up to the chapel, a man appeared out of nowhere at the edge of the path. The man had an odd appearance, yet he was wearing a serious expression. "Logan." The man stepped up and said, "There's something you need to know." Logan stiffened beside her, making Evelyn realize that this man, whomever he was not a stranger. Evelyn hadn't recognized the person who had appeared at the church steps. Evelyn's heart raced as she watched the man approach. Her spine tingled when his fierce stare locked on Logan. "What's taking place?" Evelyn muttered, holding Logan's hand a little tighter. Logan said nothing. As he stepped forward to put himself between Evelyn and the intruder, his jaw stiffened instantly. "Why are you here?" "Paul?" With caution and a quiet voice, Logan asked. Paul Tall halted a few steps away, wearing a suave suit that didn't seem right for the calm chapel. "I tried to get in touch with you earlier, but you disappeared, so he didn't give Evelyn much thought. I didn't know where you were until today. One can't run indefinitely. Logan, now is the moment to face facts." Logan's face grew white, and Evelyn could feel the anxiety radiating from him. She had never seen him like this before, so it scared her. "What on earth is Logan talking about?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Before then, Logan was unable to respond. Paul took another step forward. "That's correct, Evelyn. This is something you should discuss with your new spouse." Evelyn's stomach twisted. Despite the foundation of love and trust that had formed their relationship, she had always known that Logan had been concealing certain portions of his life from her. She wasn't sure whether she was ready for the truth Paul was going to reveal as their new life together drew closer. With a mixture of regret and despair in his eyes, Logan turned to face her. "Evelyn, but not like this. I was going to tell you everything, I promise." Evelyn started to have breathing difficulties. "Logan, tell me." Before he knew it, Logan was speaking. Paul cut in abruptly, coldly. "Logan does not speak for himself. He's not the typical Charleston waiter you've met. He comes from a fortune far larger than your father's. Years had passed since they last saw him, but he moved away from his family's wealth to pursue a different life." The words hung in the air like a cloud of thunder. Evelyn's thick, suffocating gaze was riveted on Logan. Her thoughts reeling, is this really true? She questioned, her voice wavering. Logan glanced to the ground. His face ached. "It is accurate," he told himself. "I left behind the wealth of my family because I didn't want that life. I didn't want the pressure, the manipulation, or the expectations. I wanted to find something real, something that had nothing to do with money. I learned to know you after that." Evelyn felt as though something had been torn out from beneath her. Her whole impression of Logan and their relationship had just been totally refuted. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said, whispering. With her mind spinning with uncertainty and pain, Evelyn refused Logan's advances and said, "I didn't want you to look at me the way everyone else does." Logan spoke in a broken voice. "I did not want you to think of me as just another fugitive rich guy. Not because of the money I left behind, but because of who I truly am, I needed your love." Evelyn's heart hurt from the treachery of having this huge secret kept from her and the love she had for Logan. Leaving everything behind for him, she had decided to live a life of love and simplicity. Furthermore, she was discovering that her spouse was significantly wealthier and more influential than her father could have ever imagined. Recognizing the emotional intensity of the circumstance, Paul resumed his speech in a steadier voice. "People close to you have been searching for you. Logan, they require you to come back and take up your rightful place. They require your help in running the family business." Logan shook his head. "I refuse to turn around. I am not suited for this life, as I have already stated to you." Evelyn watched the exchange in silence, her mind full of questions. Was this why Logan had kept his past a secret? Was this the reason he'd been running around Charleston so much? Paul sighed and shrugged his shoulders a little. It appears like you are unaware of the gravity of the situation. The company that your family owns and operates is about to fail. They require you. Logan, you are the only one who can keep it safe. Logan turned to look at Evelyn, pleading with her. I don't want that kind of life. I own you. I don't care about the company or the money. I worry about both of us. Evelyn was feeling quite confused and apprehensive. She had recently married him thinking she knew everything about him, only to discover he had been keeping a vast array of financial and responsibility-related information from her. Was she really supposed to trust him? After this, could their relationship survive such a significant discovery? I need some time. Evelyn backed away from Logan in a whisper. Her chest constricted from the weight of the situation. She wanted space to breathe. Logan's face fell apart, and his eyes hurt. Evelyn, please, please don't do this. Time to think is all I need. Her voice was hardly audible above a whisper as she spoke again. She turned to go down the chapel stairs, and Logan and Paul remained there silently. As Evelyn turned to go, her mind raced. It was supposed to be her happy day ever, her wedding day. Now, though, there was disagreement on everything. Following her relocation to live with Logan, she discovered he possessed a secret that might potentially change everything. What was she supposed to do now? Could she let him go? Could she still build a future with him now that she knew the truth about his past? What would her father do? Much worse. When Richard found out about it all, she knew he wouldn't take this finding lightly. Evelyn was unaware of this. Richard was already gathering information, furious and ready to attack. Evelyn wandered out of the chapel. She was lost in a maze of emotions in her thoughts. She was utterly shocked to discover that Logan wasn't the man she had thought him to be as she strolled through Savannah's serene streets. The calm beauty of the city was unable to quell her inner passion. How could he have kept something vital from her? Her mind was buzzing with questions. Was he truly Logan, the man she'd fallen in love with? Or was he just another player in the game of money and power? Like her father, perhaps. She found a small bench in a park beside the river and sat down, cradling her head in her hands. She'd left behind everything she knew and fought so hard for their love, only to find herself trapped in the same place she'd tried to escape. Going back into the chapel, Logan stood frozen on the steps, watching Evelyn disappear into the distance. His heart ached at the thought that he had hurt her. The fear of losing her had prevented him from telling her the truth each time he'd been close to doing so. It seems as though his worst nightmare was already coming true. Paul. He stood nearby and cleared his throat. You should have told her sooner. Logan turned to face him, his expression growing grim. It was not necessary for you to arrive and ruin everything for me. Paul crossed his arms and stated, I didn't ruin anything. You succeeded by keeping things under wraps. You knew this would come to light eventually. Not everything can be concealed about you. Logan's hands tightened as his rage burned within of him. I didn't want that kind of life. Paul, I declined to participate in it. All I ever wanted was to live a normal life and find a mate who loved me for who I am, not for my last name or for the money. Paul replied, and you discovered that. But you built your relationship on dishonesty. Is there really no way you could ever tell her about your past? Logan looked away, reluctant to respond. Paul was correct, but he had never intended to do Evelyn harm. He should have told her the truth from the start. Everything they had built was suddenly dangling by a thread, and he had no idea how to mend it. I refused to turn around. In the lengthy silence that followed, Paul Logan said, Tell my family I'm done. I've made up my mind. Paul shook his head. Actually, it's not that simple. Logan, the family business is struggling. They require you. I'm not concerned about it. Logan yelled. They can figure it out without me. I'm not a puppet for them anymore. Is this man you want to leave your family and obligations for? Paul moaned, clearly irritated. Logan said nothing. He wanted time to think, and he hated his family's pressure even more, so he turned and walked back into the chapel. Paul's comments hurt my feelings, Was he dodging his responsibilities? When he left the company and all his family had laboriously built, was he acting in self-interest? Even as those thoughts whizzed through his mind, one thing was clear. You could never lose Evelyn. She was the one sensible thing in his life, the only person who really got him. He had to make this right. He had to find a way to tidy up the mess he'd caused. During that period, Logan grappled with his concepts. Richard Calloway was furious at his office in Charleston. The news had come to him sooner than he'd expected. His rage had been unleashed, and Logan and Evelyn knew no bounds. He paced back and forth with his fists clenched at his sides. The fact that he'd lost control was unacceptable. How did she manage to pull this off? In his head, Richard whispered, "After everything I've done for her." His assistant Rebecca stood tensely by the door, not knowing quite what to say. She had never seen Richard so angry, and she could feel the tension in the room. She said, "Get me everything we have on Logan." Richard spoke in a low, menacing voice and gave an order. "I want to know everything he can tell me about his past and relationships. If he thinks he can take my daughter from me, he's in for more." Rebecca nodded once and left the room, leaving Richard to think on his own. He stared out the window, his mind whirling with schemes to get Evelyn back and destroy the guy who had stolen her from him. Logan married his daughter, a terrible mistake, and Richard would do nothing about it. Logan married his daughter, a terrible mistake, and Richard would do nothing about it. Returned to Savannah. Evelyn lingered on the park seat, gazing out at the river as the sun began to set. Her thoughts took up so much of her attention that she didn't realize Logan was approaching until he was right beside her. "May I please have a seat?" Quietly, he asked. Evelyn gazed up at him, her heart still pounding from everything that had happened. Logan sat down next to her and waited for a moment before she nodded slightly. Both of them said nothing. The only sounds that could be heard were the distant bustle of the city and the gentle murmur of the sea lapping against the coast. "I'm sorry." With a deep, emotive voice, Logan said in a low tone, "I should have told you the truth right away. I never intended to hurt you. Evelyn, I just didn't want you to think differently about me than everyone else did." With a mixture of hurt and perplexity in her gaze, Evelyn turned to face him. "Logan escapes my comprehension. When I told you the truth, why didn't you believe me?" Logan took a long breath and tried to think of something to say. "I've spent my entire life trying to leave that environment. Expectations, money, and pressure are all suffocating. I found something real and was able to realize my wish to be someone else with you." Evelyn's eyes softened, but the sadness persisted since you had lied to me. "How can I trust you at this point?" Logan reached for her hand and held it gently. "I apologize for breaking your trust. And if it's required, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make things right. Evelyn, please don't let this mean that we're doomed. I treasure you." That, in my opinion, is the only truth that has ever mattered. As Evelyn looked down at their linked hands, betrayal tore at her heart. She still had feelings for Logan. She was unable to dispute that, but the pain was severe. She needed some time to process everything and choose her next move. "I don't know," she murmured to Justin. "I require time." Logan nodded, his heart pounding. "Give it all the time you require. I'll be patient with you." "Evelyn, I have no intention of leaving." The city glistened in a golden glow as the sun descended. Evelyn and Logan sat in quiet, both knowing that their futures were unclear. But their love persisted, fragile but unwavering. As night fell deeper, in silence, Logan and Evelyn wandered back to the inn. The quiet streets of Savannah provided a stark contrast to the turmoil they were going through on the inside. Evelyn was originally drawn to Logan because he was different from other wealthy, entitled men like her father's business partners, but her mind was racing with hurt, love, and confusion. But this is a mystery. Had changed everything. They could feel the tension between them as soon as their room door closed behind them. Evelyn stood close to the window, facing Logan, staring out onto the dark streets. Uncertain of what to say, Logan watched her, realizing that words could not undo the harm he had caused. "How he wondered. Could he put things right? When the whole basis of their partnership had been a lie. Not even right now. Acknowledge, Evelyn said. Her voice was finally soft yet alert. You told me you wanted a simple life, yet I recently found out you left a wealth behind. Could you please just tell me the truth? Logan took a deep breath and realized how crucial this moment was. He walked over to be close to her, but not in close physical touch. I didn't want my family's wealth to define who I was or what we stood for, so I kept it a secret from you. That's not who I am. I got out of there because it was so oppressive. I didn't want to make you another rich man dependent on my family's fortune. Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes searching for an explanation. The thing that aches the most, Logan, is that you chose for me. You did not provide me a choice. I thought we were producing something real and genuine. However, this instance... I don't know what she said, but Logan felt like she was taken out of the stomach. You're correct. Although he hadn't planned to lie to her, he could now see the cost of his silence. He acknowledged, his voice filled with sadness. I should have told you that I should have trusted you because I was terrified. Evelyn, I've seen how money can ruin relationships and how people's reactions change when they realize there's money involved. I didn't want it to occur for us. I wanted you to view me in a way that is distinct from what other people see. I didn't fall in love with your money, Evelyn remarked, crossing her arms and appearing to relax, but not to lose trouble. I fell in love with Logan because you treated me like a real person and not just a name or a dollar symbol. But I'm not sure I can trust you at this point. If you have concealed something vital from me, how much more have you hidden from me? Logan leaned in closer to Evelyn and spoke in a desperate tone. There's nothing else. I was wrong, I swear, to keep this secret from you. It was the only one. However, everything I've ever said to you and everything we've made are true. I treasure you. And I don't care about money. All I want to do is hang out with you. Evelyn felt the weight of what he'd said heavy on her heart. She really wanted to believe him, to go back to the state of their love that existed before all of these revelations, but doubt kept biting at her, wondering if she could truly trust him after everything had been ruined. I need time. Her voice softer, she said it again. This is the only moment I need to think. Logan nodded, but his pain was clearly visible. I understand, so please take as much time as you need. They spent a few more days together in Savannah, but their bond had soured. The distance, the mounting unease that was growing silently, was too much for either of them to ignore. Evelyn tried to unwind by spending her days meandering through the historic squares, while Logan gave her room. Despite the seemingly long minutes spent apart, she was in need. He was desperate to make things right, even though he knew that pushing her would only make it worse. Wandering across the city, Evelyn thought about all they had been through. She had finally been able to break out of the world her father had constructed for her with Logan. It was the first time she had felt fully alive. However, this instance, when she discovered the truth about his past, she felt as though she had been pulled back into the world from which she had tried to escape. She was sitting on a seat in Forsyth Park, watching the water shoot out of the fountain. Lost in contemplation, she questioned whether she could really let go of Logan in light of everything that had transpired between them. Despite the lies, she was certain of one thing: she still loved him. However, love wasn't enough all the time, was it? Her thoughts were cut off by the sound of her phone ringing. Her gut nodded when she saw her father's name on the screen. Now that she was out of Charleston, she didn't want to talk to Richard, but she knew she couldn't avoid him forever. She replied with a groan. What do you want? Dad. When usual, Richard's voice was high-pitched when he asked Evelyn, "Where are you?" I heard about your short elopement. Could you really run away from me and this family? Evelyn tensed, her eyes closing. I held back from running away. I choose to be with the one I truly love. Richard's voice sounded so disdainful. You think that you will be saved by love? Logan is just like every other guy you have ever met. I hear that he has been lying to you about his background, Evelyn, and that he will take advantage of you and leave you. For that reason, would you rather be with a liar? The word was hurtful. But Evelyn was not going to submit to her father's authority. Logan made mistakes, but is not your father or in charge of others' lives. He doesn't view me as a business asset, Richard stated coldly. You're making a mistake, Evelyn, and you're throwing away everything I've worked for. I'm not throwing anything out. Evelyn shot back. I'm choosing my own life, my own path, and you can't control me anymore. The individual on the other end of the telephone hesitated for a long moment. Evelyn was afraid Richard was going to cut her off, but he said it again with a tone that was uncannily calm. We'll look at that more. The telephone went dead, and Evelyn sat there with a pounding heart. She'd disobeyed her father before, but this time seemed different. There was an air of finality about it, like she had crossed a line and couldn't go back. Though she was not sure what lay ahead of her, she was certain that she would not be turning around. Evelyn returned to the inn that night with more clarity than she had felt in days. She knew she could not live a life of perpetual fear, even though she was still searching for answers. When she opened the door, Logan was sitting on the edge of the bed, his countenance worn out but hopeful. Have you made up your mind yet? He asked, in silence. Evelyn nodded, her heart heavy yet resolve. I'm not going to leave you, Logan, but things must change. No more secrets or falsehoods. If we want this to work, we must be completely honest with one another. Logan stood up and took her hands in his eyes bright with relief. He promised to never again conceal secrets. I'll go to any lengths to be with Evelyn. Evelyn smiled kindly and felt the weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time since the truth had come to light, she thought they actually had a chance to establish something real and lasting, even if they still had a long way to go. The decision made by Logan and Evelyn to repair their relationship brought back a calmness that had been absent for days. Even after the challenges and revelations that nearly tore them apart, they found themselves more committed than ever. But even as they focused on repairing their relationship, Evelyn knew that her father still constituted a major risk. Richard Calloway was clearly not a man to be taken lightly, and it was clear that he would not allow her to leave without a battle. Evelyn attempted to focus on her future with Logan, but her father's quiet worried her more than anything, especially after their unpleasant conversation a week earlier. She knew Richard wasn't one to take things lightly because she had spent enough time with him. That night, his quietness was ominous, like the calm before a storm. As the sun set and the city warmed, Evelyn and Logan were at an inn when a knock came on the door. Logan finished cooking dinner in the small kitchenette, then looked up from the stove at Evelyn with caution. They hadn't told anyone where they'd been, and it felt strange to have strangers here. Evelyn's gut tightened into that familiar knot. Could her father be the culprit? Logan cleaned his hands with a towel before approaching the door and carefully opening it. Standing on the entrance was one of the regulars, Richard Calloway. Though brisk and businesslike, he was different this time. Something almost weak seemed to have replaced his usual air of power and command. Dad. With a tone that conveyed astonishment and nervousness, Evelyn spoke. Why are you here? Richard looked at her and took in the small room, realizing how simple their new life was. He recognized the stark difference between it and the surroundings he had raised her in. He stepped inside and gently closed the door behind him, but he just remained there, perhaps unsure of his place in this odd place. I came to talk. Richard spoke to the two of you in a tone that was unlike anything Evelyn had ever heard. Logan gave Evelyn a tight glance, but he remained silent. He had been waiting for this very moment. When the time is right. Despite the evident tension in the space, Evelyn motioned for Richard to have a seat. Which subject would you like to talk about? Evelyn asked. Her guarded tone suggested that she was not ready to let her guard down. Not yet, not after all that her father had done to attempt to control her life. Richard wiped his face and let out a deep sigh that was not consistent with his usual calm. Evelyn, I did something wrong. I now realize how wrong I was to think that by protecting you, I was acting in your best interests. Evelyn had known her father for many years, and she had never heard him admit he was wrong. Her eyes went really wide. It gave Richard Calloway immense pleasure to be in charge, and to always know what was best. It seemed odd to hear him say these things. Richard continued, He looked across at Logan. My entire life has been devoted to building an empire and ensuring that you have a bright future. I had forgotten what really mattered. If I had total control over everything, I reasoned, you would be protected and have the life I have always wanted for you. But I see now that what I was doing was choking you. Evelyn's heart softened a little, yet the years of manipulation and control still held a firm grip on her. You didn't just strangle me. Dad, you attempted to rob me of my autonomy and my freedom. You exerted every effort to make it difficult for me to fight only to be with Logan. Richard nodded. His expression of great regret tells me, I see now that I thought Logan wasn't the right fit for you since I didn't know him. I saw exactly what I wanted to see, a man who could not understand what it meant to be in a relationship with someone like you, because he was not a part of our world. Nevertheless, I was wrong. Logan remained silent through Richard's statements, only to finally speak up. I never wanted to take Evelyn away because of her family. I just wanted a chance at happiness for her. That's all I've ever wanted. With a look of both reverence and guilt, Richard turned to face Logan. I seem to have come to beg for your forgiveness, all of you. I realize I've caused a lot of pain, and I don't think things will get better right away. But I don't want to lose you. Evelyn. I would rather not lose my child. Evelyn leaned back in her chair with conflicting emotions. This was the exact moment she had dreamed of, her father admitting his mistakes and realizing that she wasn't just a pawn in his grander plot. But after hearing the words, she wasn't sure what to do with them. Could she let him go? Was it really possible for her to think he had changed? Or was this just an additional attempt to manipulate the situation? I'm not sure, Dad. Evelyn spoke softly, her voice trembling. Actually, it's not that simple. You hurt me. You tried to dominate me, trying to take away the one thing that gives me a sense of freedom. Richard's expression faltered for a minute, almost breaking. I want to play a part in your life, he said. I know I hurt you, and I can't change the past, but if you'll let me, I want to make things right. Evelyn. Logan is your life if you have me. Logan darted his eyes over Evelyn's, trying to find out what she was thinking about. He knew that this was not a decision he could make. It was hers. He would stand by her side no matter what she chose. Evelyn took a big breath at the decision, her heart pounding. This was the moment she had been waiting for, even though it wasn't as straightforward as she had thought. Would her father ever be totally forgiven by her? Was this really what he wanted? Could she honestly believe that? I need time to think things out, Evelyn said. Finally, her voice stayed soft and collected. There's a lot to process. Richard nodded, a look of excitement on his face. I understand. Give it as much time as it needs. All I wanted to do was say I was sorry. And that's it. Richard stood up, his demeanor less threatening than usual, and nodded to Logan. With a courteous nod in return, Logan and Richard parted ways, leaving Evelyn and Logan alone once more. Evelyn sat in silence for a long time, her mind buzzing with ideas. The pain from the past lingered even though she had finally received the apology she had been longing for. The years of hurt, control, and manipulation were still there. Though she understood forgiveness would take time, she felt for the first time that there could be hope for mending. Logan reached for her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. Evelyn smiled, grateful for his assistance, and he said, I'm with you, whatever you decide. Yes, I am conscious of it. And that's all I need right now. In the days that followed Richard's unexpected arrival, Evelyn went through a range of emotions. She had wished for her father to take responsibility and apologize, but it was too late to mend the immediate pain. She wasn't ready to forgive him just yet, and it wouldn't be easy. Whatever happened with her father, she knew that she and Logan were ready to start their new life together. Evelyn had made her choice, and now it was time to really embrace it. One day, as Evelyn and Logan strolled through Savannah's historic streets hand in hand, the weight of the past appeared to shrink a little. The smell of magnolias in bloom permeated the air, enhanced by the cobblestones beneath their boots and the soft wind. Everything seemed like the start of something new, something they wanted. Glancing across at her, Logan saw the change in her mood. "You seem lighter today," he replied, beaming. Evelyn smiled back and took his hand. "My weight has decreased. I think I'm finally starting to let go of everything that has been weighing me down." They strolled in friendly silence for a while, the peace of the city engulfing them like a blanket. Their love and strength made the future seem bright after all this time. As soon as they reached the Forsyth Park boundary, Logan looked away from her. Evelyn could feel the love and affection that had drawn her to him in his eyes, despite his solemn look. "It has been on my mind." Logan began by speaking quietly but forcefully about our future. "We've talked about letting go of Charleston and starting again, but I'm interested in your objectives. Evelyn, what kind of life do you want to build with me?" Evelyn looked up at him, love in her heart. It was not only the question, it was the manner in which he posed the question so earnestly and well in advance of his being certain of her answer. Her life had been affected by the demands of her upbringing and her father's goals. But that's all now. Here I am with Logan. She realized for the first time that she had final say. "I want a life that feels real," Evelyn declared with a firm, determined voice. "Money and status don't matter to me. When we wake up, I hope we feel like we're living for ourselves. My home must be somewhere. We are free to be who we are when the limitations of the world we came from are removed." Logan smiled. His admiration for the woman he was staring at was rising. "I desire that more than anything else." Most of the afternoon, they discussed their future goals. They talked about searching Savannah for a little, cozy home where they might raise a family. For her whole life, Evelyn had envisioned a simple home with a garden, a place where she could finally feel firmly planted and create a life far from the world of luxury and expectations that had trailed her for so long. But even as they planned for the future, Evelyn could not get her father's ideas out of her head. Richard had expressed regret, but she knew it would take time for their relationship to heal completely. A part of her wanted to ask Richard whether he was really willing to change, even if she hadn't told Logan yet. Maybe there was a way to move forward as equals instead of as the controlling father and obedient daughter. As people who had finally come to see each other for who they really were. When they returned that night to their inn, taking a seat on the side of the bed, Evelyn looked out the window at the dull streetlights below. With her limited sense of hearing, Logan was in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on dinner. Her mind wandered, concentrating on her father, the past, and the future. She and Logan were finally building. She reached for her cell phone. Her heart skipped a beat and halted when she saw her father's name while looking through her contacts. Their talk had been difficult and quite emotional when they had spoken so recently. However, this instance, a favorable distance away, Evelyn was ready to take a step. As the phone rang, she held her breath and punched whatever button it was. After a few rings, with caution but with optimism, Richard answered. "Evelyn." "Hi, Father." While she spoke, her voice stayed composed. "I've been thinking about what you said about wanting to make things right." Richard went silent for a moment, seemingly surprised by the call. "I meant all I said." "Evelyn." "Yes, I am conscious of it. To make up for the pain I brought upon you, I want to go above and beyond." Even though Evelyn's emotions were raw, she was resolute in suppressing them. "I'm not ready to forgive anything just now, but I want to try. I want to see if we can construct it under different conditions this time." There was a deep sigh of relief from the other end of the line. "That would be pleasant. Even though I know it will take some time, I'm prepared to put in the required amount." They talked for a little more, taking their time figuring out their new partnership's uncharted territory. It wasn't perfect. However, Evelyn found it sufficient because it was a beginning. When she hung up the phone, she felt a strange kind of tranquility. Above all, though, she had accepted responsibility for her own life and begun the process of mending her connection with her father. Logan had chosen their future together, and she was choosing to move forward in every aspect of her life, not just with him. Logan came over to sit with her on the bed and handed her a plate of food. He asked, "Is everything all right?" Noticing the change in her perspective, Evelyn smiled. She says she feels lighter than she has in months. So yes, everything is okay. Eventually, as they ate and joked together, the weight of the past began to lift. They had to design their own destiny. Additionally, it's the first time in a very long time. Evelyn was free once more. Now that she was on the other side of the conflict, she understood that the life she had ahead of her was one that was valuable to live, as it was hers, created according to her wishes, and it included the man she loved. She had fought for her love and her happiness,